reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. On a Shabbat, Jesus went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees, and the people there were observing him carefully. He told the parable to those who had been invited, noticing how they were choosing the places of honor at the table. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not recline at table in the place of honor. A more distinguished guest than you may have been invited by him, and the host who invited both of you may approach you and say, "Give your place to this man." And then you would proceed with embarrassment to take the lowest place. Rather, when you are invited, go and take the lowest place, so that when the host comes to you, he may say, "My friend, move up to a higher position." Then you will enjoy the esteem of your companions at the table. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. And then he said to the host who invited him, "When you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they may invite you back and you have a repayment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. And blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
The Gospel that the Church has chosen for this 22nd Sunday in Ordinary Time as two main teaching. The first one through the parable that Jesus addresses to all those present at the banquet, and the second one actually implied in the words that on the second part of the readings are addressed to the host, one of the leading Pharisees. And it is worth for us to rest on the second teaching of Jesus, the one that he addresses to the leading Pharisees. Now the scene is a scene of a banquet, and I would like you to think about the last time that you went out to dinner, or that you invited somebody to dinner to share a meal with you at your home. If we think about our last time that we did so, probably also we will see that our guests were people who in one way or another, they have something to share with our own lives. Family members, relatives, neighbors, maybe co-workers, maybe friends. Which is fine, because Jesus too actually did the same. If we go through the four Gospels, we see that many times Jesus shared the tables with people who were closer to him. Well, for instance, above all, clearly with the disciples, but then also, for example, with two of Jesus' best friends, Martha and Mary. Or when Jesus was in Capernaum, he shared the table at Peter's mother-in-law home. Or even in the well-known story that we find at the very end of the Gospel of Luke, when Jesus shared a meal with the two unnamed disciples that from Jerusalem are walking away, going to Emmaus. There are many instances in which Jesus, like us, shares meal with people who are close to us. But at the same time, also we see Jesus going through the gospel, sharing the table with strangers. Not only with strangers, but both with very religious personalities, as much as with those strangers who were made feel to be outcasted, to be sinners, to be at the very margin of Jesus' world and society. One icon that really, or image that stands out among others, is the well-known story of Zacchaeus encountering Jesus. A stranger, Jesus never met him before, an outcast, somebody who was made to feel very, very sinful, very, very bad, being not only a tax collector, but the chief tax collector. And here you have Jesus telling him, Zacchaeus, come down, that I want to go to your place and share a meal with you. And because of that, as a matter of fact, then the gospel also adds that those around Jesus, they started to grumble, to complain. And Jesus not only shared the table with all that it means. In that culture, to share in a meal was basically stating that there was a kind of tie, of link, of communion between the guest and the host. But Jesus is even able to share meals with those who were criticizing him, and even with those who rejected him. And so when we talk about sharing a meal, being at a table with others, Jesus really feels the full spectrum, from the closest one, from with those who shared in some way his life with, up to the opposite extreme with a totally stranger and extremely marginal in the society and in the world of that time. So what is the point? I think that the point is that Jesus, in so doing, was actually announcing, not as much with words, but with his choices and his way of living, that God's table is so large, so long, so wide, that at God's banquet, no one is excluded. God's banquet is preparing a table that is not too small and that is able to welcome only some of us, and some other, they don't get a room, a seat. In God tables, in God banquet, in God perspectives, we are all invited. There is always a seat that is free for us. For those who are religious, as much as for those who may be in our eyes are at the margin, are sinful, are not religious. That's how much God is hospitable. And that's the kind of God that Jesus reveals. The more we go through the Gospels, the more we follow Jesus in his public ministry, the more we get closer to the cross, and the more we get into the Paschal mystery, the more we discover, if we are following the gospel rather than the Jesus that we may have in our mind, the more we discover that Jesus reveals such a 360-degree hospitality that God has for each one of us. And that's the reason why Jesus is challenging to go back to the reading of the Gospel of Luke chosen for this 22nd Sunday in Ordinary Time. That is why Jesus challenges these leading Pharisees. When you hold a lunch or a dinner, Do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors. Rather, hold a banquet. Invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. These were people, poor, crippled, lame, blind, that at Jesus' time were at the very margin of the religious world as much as of the social world, the society. We could simply replace this character and ask ourselves, who could be today the poor, who could be today the crippled, who could be today the lame, and who could be today the blind? And what approach do we take toward them? Do we close the door rather than inviting them to join us in the all-hospitable banquet that God has prepared for us? Are we pointing fingers, or rather are we trying to build up communion with these figures? And this is very destabilizing for us, and that is true because it obliges us to go out of our comfort zone, out of our comfort world, that also we may create within our own church. It is nice, comfortable, and easy to relate to one another, we who are here. It is more challenging to try to open ourselves, to be compassionate, to embody this attitude that Jesus showed with those who actually are not sitting here. But that's actually what we are called to be. Or better, this is actually who we can become if we let the strength and the power of the good news that Jesus is the Christ to transform us. Such a good news is able to make us steward of this banquet whose width and length is so huge that has room for everybody. This is the good news I think we are called to share, the good news that we are called to preach, the good news that we are called to bring outside this church. Let us ask in this liturgy God's grace, wisdom, and strength to be able to do so, to go out our comfort zone in order to mimic, in order to embody in ourselves the hospitality that is proper of God and that Jesus simply came to reveal through his ministry, dying, and resurrecting. Amen.